By the mid-90s, Sonic was at a crossroads. With the shift to 3D gaming well underway, fans expected Sega's Blue Blur to make the jump in spectacular fashion. But instead of a fully polygonal adventure, we got this Sonic 3D Blast. Developed by Traveller's Tales and released in 1996, Sonic 3D Blast was Sega's attempt to bring Sonic into the third dimension without actually going full 3D. Using an isometric perspective and pre-rendered sprites, it was unlike anything Sonic fans had seen before. But was it a revolutionary step forward, or just a strange detour for the franchise? Was this the 3D Sonic fans had been waiting for, or just a technical experiment caught between two generations? Today, we're diving into the development, gameplay mechanics, and technical aspects of Sonic 3D Blast to find out. By 1996, Sega was in a tough spot. The gaming world was moving toward fully 3D experiences, and with competitors like Super Mario 64 redefining platforming, Sonic needed to make the leap. But there was one problem: Sega hadn't yet figured out how to bring Sonic into 3D. Sonic Team, the creators of the franchise, was already deep in development on Nights into Dreams and didn't have the resources to work on a new Sonic game. So instead, Sega handed the project over to Traveller's Tales, a UK-based studio best known at the time for their work on Mickey Mania. Originally developed for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on where you were, Sonic 3D Blast was a bold attempt to reimagine Sonic in a new perspective. Instead of the fast-paced side-scrolling action fans were used to, this game took an isometric approach, using pre-rendered 3D sprites to create the illusion of depth. But when Sega realized the Saturn wouldn't be getting a proper Sonic game, they made a last-minute decision to port Sonic 3D Blast to the Saturn as a stopgap release. And this is where things get interesting. Traveller's Tales had just 7 weeks to upgrade the game for the Saturn. While the core gameplay remained the same, the Saturn version featured higher resolution textures, enhanced lighting effects, a smoother frame rate, and a completely new soundtrack composed by Richard Schack. The team also took advantage of the Saturn's hardware to add new weather effects and improve the special stage, which now resembled the ones from Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Despite these enhancements, the game was still fundamentally built on Genesis-era design, meaning it didn't take full advantage of the Saturn's true 3D capabilities. This left fans wondering, was Sonic 3D Blast just a placeholder, or was it a glimpse of what Sonic's future could have been? At first glance, Sonic 3D Blast looks like a standard Sonic game: rings, badniks, springs, and the familiar goal of reaching the end of the level. But once you pick up the controller, it's clear this is not your typical Sonic experience. Unlike the high-speed side-scrolling action fans were used to, Sonic 3D Blast uses an isometric perspective. This means the world is tilted at an angle, giving the illusion of depth. The change in perspective fundamentally alters how Sonic moves. Instead of precise platforming and breakneck speed, the game leans more toward exploration and puzzle solving. But with this shift came a challenge: control. Sonic's movement feels looser than usual, and navigating the diagonal world can be tricky, especially when trying to line up jumps or avoid enemies. Unlike traditional Sonic games, where momentum plays a big role, movement here feels more methodical, forcing players to adapt to a new style of gameplay. The biggest shakeup? Flickies. Instead of simply racing to the finish line, Sonic's main goal in each level is to rescue 5 flickies, small, colorful birds trapped inside enemies. Defeat a badnik, and a flicky pops out, bouncing around unpredictably until Sonic collects it. But here's the catch: if Sonic takes damage, any flickies he's collected scatter, forcing players to chase them down again. This adds an extra layer of challenge, as players must carefully navigate levels while keeping their flicky squad intact. It's a system that feels more in line with a collect-a-thon platformer like Banjo-Kazooie than a traditional Sonic game. Despite its slower pace, Sonic 3D Blast does retain some familiar elements. Power-ups, such as speed shoes, invincibility, and the classic elemental shields, make a return. The Gold Shield, exclusive to this game, grants Sonic a homing attack, something that would later become a staple in 3D Sonic games. In a way, this shield was a sneak peek at what was to come in future Sonic titles, proving that even in an experimental game like Sonic 3D Blast, pieces of Sonic's future were starting to take shape. While Sonic 3D Blast wasn't a true 3D Sonic game, the Saturn version did make some notable improvements. Enhanced lighting, sharper textures, and smoother animations gave it a more polished look compared to its Genesis counterpart. The biggest upgrade? The special stages. These were fully polygonal, running at a much smoother frame rate, offering a glimpse of what a real 3D Sonic could have been. But despite these enhancements, the game was still built on 16-bit foundations. The isometric perspective made movement feel sluggish, and occasional frame rate dips showed that even with the Saturn's extra power, it wasn't perfectly optimized. For many fans, Sonic 3D Blast felt like a stopgap, a game that looked better than its Genesis counterpart, but ultimately failed to deliver the true 3D Sonic experience they were waiting for. So where does that leave Sonic 3D Blast? It's a game that sits in an awkward place, technically impressive in some areas, but limited by its roots. It wasn't the breakthrough Sonic title the Saturn needed, and with Sonic X-treme's cancellation, it became the only Sonic game on the system outside of compilations. For some, it's a nostalgic experiment that tried something different. For others, it's a frustrating detour in Sonic's history. But one thing's for sure, Sonic 3D Blast stands as a fascinating snapshot of Sega's struggle to bring their mascot into the next generation. But what do you think? Was Sonic 3D Blast an underrated gem or a forgettable misstep? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this retrospective, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more deep dives into gaming history.